Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Just Good Games. Metal Gear Solid is one of my favourite gaming series of all time. The story, the action, the quirks and the twists and the turns are just top notch. But what is the best Metal Gear Solid game? Well, once again, I will be breaking things down into 5 different categories and assigning a score out of 10 for each of those categories. The categories are as follows: gameplay, story, bosses, soundtrack, and Kojima Style, which is how well it balances all of Kojima's quirks. I'm only going to be doing the solid titles, so no Portable Ops and Metal Gear 1 and 2. So with that being said, let's find out what is the best Metal Gear Solid game. But just before we do that, I want you to go down there and hit that subscribe button. I do have a soft spot for Peace Walker, but it is definitely the weakest of the main 9 games. The story is a nice continuation from 3, and some of the changes which this game implemented ended up carrying on over into later games. This game plays very much like Metal Gear Solid 3 Lite, and due to the mission structure doesn't allow for too much experimentation, but it is still a solid game. And the whole mission select side of things and stuff like side ops and base building and soldier management are all well implemented, and they carry over nicely to Metal Gear Solid 5 and even into Death Stranding. It's a nice story with some cool twists and moments, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not too mega. It does though introduce some great characters who again play a greater role in Metal Gear Solid 5 and progresses Big Boss's story nicely. When looking back on this game, it's actually a great prequel for Metal Gear Solid 5. The bosses in this game are the weakest in the series, but they are still fun. The flair and the creativity is just not as good as the other games, with mostly machine style bosses, which only really require you to throw as much firepower as you can at them. There's a couple clever ones, but it's just not on the level of the other games. The soundtrack to this game is not really memorable, and I actually had to go back and listen to it to see what it was all about. The main theme is cool, but that's about it, as there's no real standouts. It's got good espionage music though, it's just standard espionage music. I love the game's cutscenes and the art style of that, and the quirks of this game are great, but the whole dating simulator thing and some of the stuff with Paz, like being able to do the dating simulator with her and the fact that she's wearing a bikini for the final boss, makes this one of the stranger Metal Gear Solid games. But as I said, this is still a great game and really helps set up Metal Gear Solid 5. Something had to come at the bottom of the pile, and fortunately this was it. Sons of Liberty is sort of the red-headed stepchild of the Metal Gear Solid franchise, and it's most well known for the ride and bait and switch. But once you get past that, there's truly a great game underneath. Yes, this game probably peaked with the fantastic tanker introduction, but it definitely has its moments after that. I also am probably right in saying that the story in this game is maybe the most convoluted, although 4 and 5 really do push it. But what I will say is, this for me is the weirdest and strangest of all the Metal Gear Solid games, although 5 does have its moments and so does 4. Although visually upgraded, the gameplay mechanics of Metal Gear Solid 2 are pretty much the same as in Metal Gear Solid 1 on a general level, but the first person aiming system was a great addition, and the enemy AI was vastly improved, allowing for them to call for backup and operate more as a group rather than individuals. This really helped progress the stealthy style of the game. You mostly find yourself stalking your way through corridors with a few outside spaces, but nothing as big and as wide open as some of the later games. The improved cover mechanic also took this game to the next level. The story in Metal Gear Solid 2 is probably my least favourite in all of the series. besides maybe Peace Walker. It starts off really well with Snake tracking down Ocelot and a new Metal Gear Ray to a tanker. It's a great opening, as I said, and Snake being framed for what goes down is a great setup, but it takes a bit of a bad turn. I'm okay with the raid and bait and switch, but I find this story less interesting than if it was Snake trying to clear his name. Don't get me wrong, trying to take down Liquid Ocelot and then Solidus, and the fact that Solidus is the third brother is amazing. But the plot at the end of the game just gets a bit muddled. It tries to introduce way too much and give you too much information at some times. It requires a lot of reading and looking into afterwards to fully get it, and once you do, it's pretty good, and there's some nice twists and turns throughout the game. I also like how ambiguous it is at the end, but it just doesn't stack up really compared to the rest, and there's also the whole simulation factor of it, which I just don't enjoy that much. The bosses in this game are good, but not great. Vamp, Solidus and Metal Gear Ray are good fights, but don't really reach the highs of the other games. And Dead Cell, although there's some great strategies to take them down and they're pretty cool, are probably the worst group of bosses you take on in the first 4 games. When you compare them to Foxhound, Cobra Unit and even the Beauty and the Beast unit, I just don't think they stand out as much, although it is close between them and the Beauty and the Beast unit. The soundtrack is very similar in style to the first game, with the espionage style of the music, and also like the first game, it's pretty much all instrumental. And don't get me wrong, I like instrumental songs, but the later games just have some absolute standout and iconic tracks. Also, the licensed music in the later games also helps. When I think of the iconic Metal Gear Solid music, my mind goes more to the other games, but the Tanker Incident is a great track. This game struggles to balance the quirks and, let's say, the weirdness of Kojima. The naked riding part springs to mind, and those crotch covering car wheels, just something else. Also, you can make Otacon catch Snake in a very compromising position in a locker. I'm not sure if this is just in the HD remaster, but I'm counting it. On the other side of things, the whole Colonel Campbell glitching out moment and all the glitches towards the end are really cool and really shows off Kojima's creativity. Overall, Metal Gear Solid 2 built well on the first game, but failed to really hit the highs of the original, and what would come after improves upon it massively. But I know there are some people that consider this the best, and I can sort of see where they're coming from, but it's just not for me. This is more than likely going to be the last Kojima helmed Metal Gear Solid, unless Sony decide to buy the rights from Konami, which I just don't see happening. And this was easily the most advanced gameplay wise, and it just looked amazing. Taking Metal Gear open world was a masterstroke and allowed for many new gameplay options. It also had the most to do in any of the games, with main ops, side ops, base building and an online option. But a couple key areas really let this game down, which is a shame, as it could have really pushed for the top spot if it was completed. The best gameplay in any Metal Gear Solid game, hands down. There's so many different ways to approach combat and missions. There's a massive variety of weapons and gadgets for Venom Snake to utilise, and the vehicles just added another string to its bow. Having a companion was great. D-Dog was most definitely my favourite. It was also just fun to play and to experiment with all of these tools. I watched cutscenes in the first few games and wished that I was in control of what was going on. Well, this game made those wishes come true, and then some. All the base building and mother base mechanics are fantastic. This game just makes you really feel like you are truly Big Boss / Venom Snake, which is funnily quite ironic. This score is so low for two major reasons. Firstly, the story is not finished as Konami pushed for its release. The first half of the game is absolutely fantastic and is well paced even with the sort of slow start, and then it builds nicely to your showdown with Skullface. Meeting a young Eli / Liquid Snake and Psycho Mantis is amazing, and if it was to end after that first part, it would have a much higher score, but it goes on and seems like it's going to end amazingly, and then it just stops with a twist that, if built right, works, but is a bit jarring in how it's executed, which is the second reason why it scores so low. The fact that you are not Big Boss and in fact a medic twist works, and it ties up some nice loose ends in the series, but is an abrupt twist and then the game just sort of ends. Also, it doesn't tie everything together, and it implies there should be a third part of the game. You can tell this game is meant to be the series Revenge of the Sith, and if Kojima was able to properly finish it, we probably would be looking at the top game. The bosses, although not as inventive and memorable as some of the other games, are still amazing and live up to the high standards of the previous Metal Gear games. I can't say the name of the big Metal Gear, I just struggle with it, but the big Metal Gear is the biggest thing I've ever had to take on in a Metal Gear Solid game, and it's so fun. I really enjoyed the fight with Eli / Liquid. It's a great moment, and although you're not really Big Boss, it was still amazing to have a Big Boss versus Liquid Snake moment. The skulls are a good reoccurring boss, and the man on fire is great as well. I enjoyed the dynamic of the fight and the fact you have to find different ways to cover him in water. Overall, some great boss fights, but not great enough to put it in the top tier. The soundtrack to this game is very good, and that is mostly due to the use of licensed songs. You can tell Kojima really loved the 80s. The use of David Bowie's, but not sadly his version, Man Who Sold the World is amazing. Not Your Kind of People is a great song and works really well in the game, and is used in probably my favourite trailer of all time, one of my favourite trailers of all time for this game. The soundtrack really is just a who's who of 80s icons, from Hall & Oates to Toto to The Cure. This is a game of extremes for Kojima Style. On one hand, you have the charm and somewhat funny moments like tricking guards with cutouts of women, and just Kojima's general style and quirks which have formed over the years. It's really fun at times. Where this game loses the points though is the whole quiet issue. I don't need to go into it, as you probably already know all about that, but it really was just a step too far. Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain really should have been pushing for the top of this list. And I absolutely love this game. The more I think about it though, the more it feels like it could have been so much more, and almost feels like an opportunity missed. And I've not really forgiven Konami yet for the part they played in this, so this placing feels about right. I've got a feeling this is going to be a bit of a Marmite entry, as I absolutely love this game, but I know there's some Metal Gear Solid fans who hate it. This game had so much work to do, and had to do a lot to finish Solid Snake's story in a satisfying way and to tie together all the loose threads, but for my money, it absolutely nailed it. This game was a big step up from Metal Gear Solid 3 and is probably the second biggest jump in gameplay in the evolution of the series. It's not quite on 5's level, but it's still great to play, and is really the first time I would say that Snake's skills are fully realised. The Octo Camo is one of the greatest new additions to the series ever, and allow for some great stealthy gameplay. It's not fully open world, but the spaces in each act, well, more the first two acts, allow for different approaches and offers a lot of replay value. There's also a few sections which change up the gameplay a bit, and that always scores well with me. Although a lot of this story revolves around nanomachines, it's still a fantastic send-off for Solid Snake and is full of fan service and great moments. The return to Shadow Moses is pitch perfect, as is the reveal of Big Boss at the end of the game. The story had a lot to do, and I honestly think it tied it together really well and gave us a great final chapter to the series. I say final chapter in quotation marks. I also love that Liquid Ocelot is truly realised and truly steps up and takes centre stage as the main antagonist in this game. Although we all know what his true motivations are now, it was still cool to see him in full-on evil villain mode. I really enjoyed the bosses in this game, with some of them serving as direct throwbacks to the first game. The Beauty and the Beast unit offers some great boss fights, but I don't think Screaming Mantis and Raging Raven are quite up to the standard of the rest. The two bosses in this game which really stand out for me though and push it to the top level are Metal Gear Ray, which you take on in an amazing mech battle where you control Metal Gear Rex, and of course the final showdown with Ocelot, which is probably my favourite boss battle in the entire series. The music, the 4 stages and the combat evolution of that boss is just amazing. Old Snake's theme is my second favourite song in the entire series. It just fits him so well and just really shows the journey which he's been on. The soundtrack of this game runs high on the nostalgia and brings back some of the best bits of the other games. It is a great soundtrack and offers up some great new stuff as well, but just doesn't do enough to push it into the best soundtrack territory. This game's Kojima Style skews a bit more towards the weird than the cool. It's still quite good though. I love that the mechs make cow noises for some reason, and Raiden is so over the top and cool now. All the Raiden ninja stuff is amazing, but the Johnny incidents and the weird photo modes with the Beauty and the Beast women is just a bit too much. Metal Gear Solid 4 is a great game and a really good way to end Solid Snake's story. It's full of great action, amazing twists, and has you mashing buttons to make Snake drag himself down a microwave corridor for God's sakes. What more do you need? Great game, Metal Gear Solid 4. It's a testament to how great and how groundbreaking the first Metal Gear Solid game was that it commands such a high place on this list. But what it has going for it is the best group of bosses in the game, a story which is one of the most complete and coherent stories Kojima has ever written, and although a bit dated now, the gameplay that revolutionised the business. This is the game that brought stealth gameplay into the mainstream and did it in such style that it spawned countless copycats. The set piece sequences were unlike anything we had really experienced before, and it just changed the way we play games to a more cinematic style. But when you compare this to the other games and go back and play it, the gameplay is just a bit dated, and due to obviously all the other games coming out afterwards and being on more powerful consoles, it's just a bit limited compared to the others, and that's why unfortunately scores a bit low. Not being burdened by having any real continuity to follow besides the 2 Metal Gear games on the NES probably helped this game out so much, and that is why this story is so good and it works very much as a standalone and is just full of classic moments. The reveal that Liquid Snake has been Miller all along, all the boss fights and just everything to do with Grey Fox is amazing. It's not as complicated and convoluted as some of the other games and was a great way to start a franchise. This game has the greatest collection of bosses, not just in the Metal Gear Solid games but in video games in general. Sniper Wolf, the Hind D, Vulcan Raven, Metal Gear X, Fighting Liquid Snake on that Metal Gear X, the Cyborg Ninja, Revolver Ocelot, and finally Psycho Mantis are all great and classic boss fights. Mantis is worth the 10 on its own, and how it blew everyone's minds in 1998. Just a classic game which started the trend of Metal Gear Solid games having great bosses. The soundtrack to this game is good, but not as good as some of the other games in the series, and while it debuts the iconic main theme, it doesn't offer much else. The soundtrack is very James Bond / espionage film at times, which is really cool, and the James Bond style music comes back in the game, which has a much better soundtrack. This game balances Kojima's quirks and weirdness nicely. It sort of had to really, as being the first game in the series, I think he probably wanted to ease people into his direction and writing style gently, but obviously not too gently, as the long cutscenes and just crazy innovation like the Psycho Mantis boss battle and the codex code on the back of the game case are all hallmarks of Kojima's genius. But you obviously have Otacon wetting himself, all the Johnny stuff, and the Melra in her underwear bit, which is why it just loses a couple points. Overall, this classic game, although a bit dated by today's standards, is still one of the benchmarks for cinematic gaming, and back in 1998 it changed the gaming world. It told a great story without ever getting too convoluted by Kojima's standards, and the fact that it's only been bettered once, obviously according to this list, is just a testament to how good this game is. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater is number 1, and honestly I think as an overall package it is the best Metal Gear Solid game. It is my favourite in all honesty. Although it doesn't have the best gameplay in the series, it was leaps and bounds ahead of the first 2 games, and for my money it has the best story of any of the Metal Gear Solid games. The bosses are innovative, the soundtrack iconic, and Kojima's style and quirks really shine through in this game. Although what follows is arguably better gameplay wise, Metal Gear Solid 3 is the first game where it feels like you start to really feel like you are a super soldier, and although still a stealth title, it moves a bit more towards the action side of things. The big set pieces are amazing, and that you play out some things which you might have only seen in cutscenes in the earlier games. The camouflage mechanic is great, and the CQC again makes you really feel like you're playing as a super soldier, a super spy. The injury and treatment system also added a nice bit of realism to the gameplay. Besides the first game, this is probably the easiest to follow, although easy is putting it mildly. It has a nice emotional core to the central conflict between the boss and Naked Snake that really drives the story right up until their final confrontation at the end. The boss is actually a double agent twist, it's fantastic, and this game also sows the seeds for Ocelot's sort of face turn as he's like a triple agent. The story in this game also nails the Bond of Vietnam style to a T and is just really enjoyable. This game has some of the best bosses in the series. The boss and the end are definitely in like the top 5 bosses in the entire series. All the other bosses are of a really high level besides the pain, which is why this game loses 1 mark. Also, all the bosses' stories are really fleshed out, and every encounter is memorable and relies on you using all of the skills you have learned up until that point to take them on. There's just some great innovation here, and as I said, all the bosses have stories to them, and it just makes it feel a lot more personal. This was an instant 10 for the Snake Eater theme alone. Snake Eater is just a straight up Bond song that even plays over Bond style titles at the beginning of the game. It also comes back throughout the game at some great moments, like when you climb the absolute massive ladder. It's just easily the best song in the entire series. The rest of the soundtrack is on point as well. The music which plays out when you're escaping with Eva on the motorbike is awesome, and so is just the music for all the boss battles. This game's Kojima style is great, with only one real down point being Eva's weird cat crawl in the waterfall and actually that guy grabbing your crotch to find out who you are. But they are just minor gripes. This game is truly the pinnacle of Kojima's style, writing and direction. It manages to combine his love of Western pop culture, Bond and Eastern influences all into one amazing game, which I don't think he has ever topped and actually might not ever top. Metal Gear Solid is one of my absolute favourite gaming series. It's just amazing and changed gaming for the better, and Metal Gear Solid 3 is the best of a great bunch. Right, so thank you for making it to the end of a video. I know it was a long one, but there's a lot of Metal Gear Solid games. I really hope you enjoyed it as I have enjoyed making this video. All I want you to do now is hit subscribe, like, share, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and once again you have been watching Just Good Games.